The payday loan industry has come under fire in recent months for preying on the poor in times of economic crisis, but new reports show that the industry is doing far worse things to underprivileged Americans, and I have attorney David Hirsch with me to explain what's happening. You know, it's amazing to me. American banks are going to make money any way they can, even if they have to do business, as we see happening with these payday loan scammers. First of all, explain what payday loan is and what it's doing to the American consumer, would you, Dave?
You know, Pat, payday loans are, in fact, a scam. They lent, last year the statistics were available, $40 billion in payday loans. This is to usually the members of our society who don't have a banking relationship. So they go to these storefront locations, and the last statistic I saw said there are more storefront payday loan locations than there are Starbucks and McDonald's combined. A $40 billion industry that generated over $7.5 billion in revenue. And what they do is they provide liquidity to people who can't quite make it to their next payday. So they loan against their forthcoming paycheck at exorbitant rates and then collect the money regardless of the financial well-being of the person who's doing the borrowing. So, for example, you'll have a short-term loan. The typical loan is $375. Typically, it's due within a couple of weeks. But the interest rates on these loans, the interest rates, and this is not a typo, okay, 300 to 500%. Typical interest rate on a payday loan to the people who don't have an established banking relationship, they can't go down to their local bank and cash a check, 300 to 500%, and people are strapped financially. And the real problem comes, most of the time, folks have a hard time repaying those loans at the end of the 14 days or at the time of the next payday, so they renew those loans. Of course, the interest rate gets jacked up again, and they get into a vicious cycle of never being able to catch up with their own paychecks.
You've got the people out there, and it's a ridiculous argument when you think about the harm that it's causing these people. These people never get out of debt. They just never, ever get out of debt. But the argument the payday loan people make is, gee whiz, there's no way they could get a loan anywhere else if it weren't for us. Now, that argument sounds good until you start looking at the stories of what 300 to 400 to 500% interest in a 2-week period does. Basically, they never get away from the payday loan. The payday loan starts taking more and more of a percentage of the little money they can make to where there is no benefit. What bothers me also about this story, though, is that you have the national banks. You have the big Wall Street banks that are now getting involved, even though regulations say they may not be involved. They should not be involved. What's your take on that?
Federal regulators have taken a look at over 56 million transactions. And what they find is that these basically state-regulated payday loan operations that are very loosely regulated are in cahoots with the national banks. And the national banks are giving them access to national databases where the payday loan provider can actually go into a customer's account and deduct the money directly out of it, even though that's a direct violation of federal regulation, even though that is directly contrary to what the federal government says our federally chartered banks can do. And the trick bag of all this is that when the distressed individual who needs the money to make it to the next payday goes to the payday loan storefront right there next to the pawn shop or the McDonald's, and they sign the paperwork that has this microfine print on it, one of the things they do is they sign away their right to file a lawsuit. And it's not disclosed. It's not what's required.
Well, it's called arbitration. Explain how ridiculous explain how meaningless arbitration is.
Well, and so what's happened is that the banks, who theoretically aren't a party to this contract, are forcing people to go to arbitration. That means in order to fight what's happened, the person who's gotten the payday loan, who can barely afford life as it is going to have to pay to file for an arbitration. They're going to have to pay for an arbitrator. The bank is going to get to choose who the arbitrator is that makes a decision. It becomes a private backroom deal where they get a decision in secret and nothing is ever revealed. Now, no one, Pap, who's in a position where they're having to borrow $375 just to make it to the next payday is going to be able to afford an arbitration. They can't fight the banks.
Let me show you how ridiculous this thing about arbitration is. As a matter of fact, they're trying to use arbitration with everything now, but for payday loans. Here's how it works. You get your payday loan. The payday loan company could absolutely, they could misbill you, they can overbill you, they can do anything. And when you catch them, what they do, now this is how crazy this thing called the arbitrator. They may as well just have an employee that works in back of payday loans that comes out to the front desk. That person is then the arbitrator of who's done wrong, who's entitled to win. Under the statistics, the consumer never wins. If they win, it's like, it's less than 3 or 4% at best on any, and most of the time that's simply a mistake. But so right now, the person that goes to that payday loan agency, it's all stacked against them. And now add to that, Wall Street has gotten involved to stack it against them. And the Department of Justice, what have they done about this? Who's gone to jail? Who's been prosecuted for this?
No one's gone to jail. Come on, Pap, you know better than that. There's big money at stake. Of course no one's gone to jail. Interestingly, a small study was done over a very small slice of time about one payday loan operation, Ace Cash Express. And over a period of a couple of months, they determined that there was over $5 million. $5 million of inappropriate fees have been extracted, and they were fined another $5 million. But now people have to go through a whole process to try to claim some of that, and that's just a small snapshot in time. And no one's going to jail. No one's paying the price on this. It is such a lucrative business for which there is no regulation, no enforcement, and no access to the courts, that the people that are stuck in this endless cycle of payday loans have no recourse.
Can't you for example, couldn't you initiate a class action against them? You can't even do that under the law, can you?
You cannot initiate a class action. Part of the reason is, we have decisions from our Supreme Court that limit and virtually eliminate consumer class action cases, number one. Number two, we have arbitration clauses that have consistently been enforced so that the banks, Wall Street, the investors, as well as the payday loan operations have the ability to force you to go to arbitration. And as you said, it ends up basically being someone who works full-time for the payday loan operation who makes the decision about whether or not what was done was proper. So it's a totally stacked deck. There's no access to the courts.
Dave, I saw a story that appeared on one of the TED presentations. It was brilliant. It was actually delivered by a multi-billionaire, almost a gazillionaire, I guess the way you would call him, more money than he could ever spend. He came out on this TED Talk and said, you know what's wrong with these kinds of stories? Is because, and he was talking as a billionaire that says, I'm worried about me. I'm not making a moral judgment here. I'm worried about me because at some point, people get pushed, they get trampled on, they get hammered to the point to where, you know what, at the end of the day, all that happens is they bring out the pitchforks. We've seen it happen in Europe, we've seen it happen in Asia, and we're kidding ourselves. In about 30 seconds, we're kidding ourselves, aren't we, if we don't think it's going to happen here.
We're absolutely kidding ourselves. We are setting ourselves up for class warfare because disillusioned people who don't have a recourse in the courts are going to end up doing something at some point, and that's not going to be asking for help. It's going to be getting the pitchforks out. It's going to be, unfortunately, violence in the streets. It
won't be letters to the editor, will it? Thank you for joining me again. Interesting story. It's the kind of story people just don't hear enough about in corporate media.